Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our show is presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. It's part of the 440 Sports Network. Today's show features Chip Fridrich, and this is the second upload of this show. The first one had a file from last week by mistake, so hopefully you were hearing this version instead. You may have heard a previous one where we had an old file. My apologies for that. So without further delay, here is the real episode today with Chip Fridrich. Chip Fridrich joins me. It is Monday morning. Vanderbilt has swept Kentucky and, to be honest, kind of stole Game 3 and really caught some breaks on Friday night. I guess breaks even out in baseball because you could argue Vandy could have used one in Knoxville. But anyway, the Commodores now 3-3 on their last two weekends, which is kind of where I thought they'd be, although I didn't see it happening exactly the way it did. Chip got to watch some of it in Nashville on Friday night, got to follow some other parts of it as he was doing traveling soccer on Saturday and Sunday. In any case, Chip, thanks for joining us. Glad you're here today.
Good to be with you, Chris. Yeah, it was a good weekend. Anytime you can sweep in this league, it's you don't take that lightly. I think it was what I was impressed with more was the response from last weekend after what happened in Knoxville, which was, we talked about this the biggest disappointment of the year that they've had so far and the biggest stumbling block that they've had as a team. And they responded and they get the 3 wins against a team that still sits high in the RPI, which I don't really understand, but that's a whole nother thing. Looking at the RPIs nationally doesn't really hurt Kentucky all that much. Although, what were they before the weekend? Were they 1?
I think they were 2.
2, so they fell a little bit. It was a good response weekend. Good to see some guys with some confidence back in front of the home crowd. And, we talked about exams and all those things that can happen. Last week, the UT weekend really there weren't actual exams being taken. I mean, there was studying going on and, study sessions and reading days and all that. But if you talk about, really want to say, which was probably the more of the weekends that guys weren't getting sleep and maybe minds not on baseball, it would have been this week coming up. This past week with the Kentucky series is the one that you would traditionally worry about. And I thought the overall response was great. Getting 3 wins again is nothing to sneeze at. Anytime you get them, you take them. And as you head down this final stretch with 9 games left, at Alabama, at Florida, and Arkansas, those are daunting tasks. Those are games that are not going to be easy, to say the least. Anytime you go on the road in this league, and the next 6 of the 9 are going to be on the road, and then a tough Arkansas team, of course, to finish things off. So overall, great response. There were some guys who were, struggling offensively. We know about that, and we can talk about that. But from the pitching standpoint, you can't ask any more. Maldonado doing what he did, coming in, playing basically just flawless in his relief appearance. And it was good to see. Just overall, as a team, I thought it was a positive weekend as they move forward here, the final 9 in the conference.
Yeah, 9 conference games left. Vanderbilt, of course, maintains a half-game lead over LSU, which has got the far easier schedule from here on out. And frankly, is probably going to win the league, I would guess. But all right, over-under on conference wins from here on out. Again, you mentioned those. Arkansas here, at Alabama, at Florida. I'll set it at 5.8. What are you taking?
Boy, that's a good line there by you. I think I said, 2 weeks ago.
Using that one a lot.
I think, but it's a good line too. I mean, it would, if Vegas made a line that would be, based on who they're playing.
Close, right?
Be close. The 5.8. But when we were 15 games to go a couple weeks ago, and I think I said if they went, surprisingly, I think I said if you went 9-6, 8-7, that would probably be enough to get you I think we said national seed or definite regional host, because I think that would get the Magic to 20 wins. But that's, Alabama. I mean, let's take them first. I mean, let's break down the three. Alabama didn't play anybody to begin the year, and they started off like one of the conference darlings along with Kentucky. I would say Kentucky and Alabama, got some accolades early, but when you're playing High Point and you're playing Richmond and you're playing UIC, who UIC is probably the best of the teams they played, and Alabama State and Columbia from the Ivy League, you're going to rack up some wins. And they've been up and down. They go to Baton Rouge this weekend and lose all three and get swept. The previous weekend they beat Missouri and swept Missouri at Missouri, which was impressive. And then they go to Baton Rouge back-to-back weekends and lose three. So they've sort of been up and down in the conference. The overall record 30-15 and 9-12. They got some work to do to get in the tournament, I think. I mean, they're not definitely in because I don't know what their RPI is if you have it in front of them, but strength of schedule too is not all that daunting. But they get the benefit of having the league games. So if you break that down as far as those three, I mean, you would like to think we could go in there and take at least 2 out of 3. Florida's going to be tough. Anytime you go into Gainesville on the road and a team that's, top 10 team in Florida, I don't care what they've done here of lately, it's going to be tough there. So if you get out of there, I'm just guessing here, if you take 1 out of 3 there, that's 4. And then, I mean, you're right, the 5.8, why don't you just set it in Vegas and get it out there and see who wants to bet on it? What do you think? What are you going with? I'm going to say 6. So I'm going over your 5.8, barely. I'm not gonna be greedy here.
I think I'd take the under. I think really? I'd go 2 at Alabama, 2 against Arkansas and Nashville, and 1 at Florida. Florida in that ballpark with that teams that can mash, and of course, you know how Tennessee can get under Vanderbilt's skin. Florida does the same type of stuff. I mean, sure. That's been the case ever since Kevin O'Sullivan's been there. I just think that if they get to 6, you feel great about it. I just think that's a lot to bite off.
Well, I think it's realistically looking at it from a distance. I think, yeah, it's probably in the if you get 5 or 6, I think you got to be happy. You kind of keep things intact. I think you're going to stay in the top 10. I think your strength of schedule is only going to get better with Arkansas and Florida on there, and it's not going to get hurt with Alabama. You can't afford to lose and stumble like they did in Indiana State with Georgia State coming up. Georgia State, I think, is 97 or 98 in the RPI. And they're coming off a sweep. They're coming off a sweep themselves. Although, 24 and 21 in that league. I mean, overall in their league, they're 11 and 10. So they're not an Indiana State quality, of course. So you don't want to stumble there. So I think 5 or 6 wins out of the next 9 in the league, I think you're in real good shape.
Yeah, I would agree. I think at this point, let's see, Boyd's World does RPI needs report, and he's been really bad at updating his site lately. He hasn't updated his non-RPI ratings in half a month. And he usually updates this RPI needs report, which is a good guide to tell you what you need to do. For instance, he says, what you need to do to get in the top 45 of the RPI, which would be about what you need to do to get an at-large bid if it just goes straight down RPI. Top 32 is a top 2 seed, again, if it just goes straight down RPI. Top 16, which would be host, and top 8, which would be a national seed. And he had Vandy coming into the weekend needing to get a top 8 seed, either 7 or 8 wins, depending on where those came. And Vanderbilt got 3 this week. So really, you only need about 4 more wins, maybe 5 out of the remaining, 12 games to get a top 8 national, according to RPI. And I think top 16 is just about wrapped up. It needed 5 more wins, and it got 3. So if the numbers haven't changed, Vanderbilt needs 2 more wins to finish with the top 16 RPI. And what do we say? 5 more?
Right.
4 to 5 more to finish top 8 in RPI. And look, if it gets, if Vanderbilt ends up winning, say, 18 games in the league, which would mean it kind of face-plated and goes 2-7 down the stretch, I still think, that's going to host 18-12 in this SEC. They'll look at how you finish, but I don't know how you keep them out. And get to 20 and same thing. I don't know how you really keep them out as a top 8 national seed in all likelihood.
Yeah, I agree. And let's do this a little exercise because I think this is interesting. East and West, who gets in based on right now, and who's definitely in, who's got some work to do, and who's out? I would say, looking at the East, I would say Georgia and Missouri. Let's just take the two that are out. I think Georgia and Missouri are out. They're not going to make the tournament.
Georgia's got a chance. Georgia's got a series this weekend with Tennessee. Georgia is in the RPI this morning. Let me pull this up. Excuse me. I'm going to pull up D1s because I think that's probably the most accurate according to Warren Nolan. Warren Nolan's updates in real time, but it's a little wonky from time to time. Georgia is, 23, 24, and 20. I remember one year Georgia just needed to win a game to make sure it finished above 500, and it got that in Hoover, and it ended up getting in the NCAA tournament because the RPI was so high. Now Georgia's going to need to finish. Georgia's 8-13. Let me look at the remaining games.
If they get swept this weekend, though, Chris.
If they get swept this weekend, you can kiss it goodbye because here's the deal.
8-16.
Tennessee at Missouri, which is reeling, and LSU and Athens, which, again, Georgia plays really well in Athens, just swept Arkansas last weekend before losing 2 of 3 at Ole Miss and had a chance in the 9th, but lost 8-7. Let's see. Tennessee's 1-9 on the road. If Georgia can get 2 and sweep Missouri, then that's 5. That's 13. Get 1 against LSU. There's your formula if you're Georgia. Go 6-9. Although that's tough.
Yeah, this is a huge series for them.
I think 13 and 17 would probably do it. So get 5 of those. Especially if one is a series win over Tennessee or LSU. But that's not going to be easy.
Yeah, they might have some work to do in the tournament. I think either way, I think they would. And Missouri's out at 5-16. To think that 3 of their 5 wins in the conference are against UT, that's just incredible. And 1 against Vanderbilt. So they 4 of their 5 wins in the league play have come against Vanderbilt and Tennessee. 3 of them with Tennessee and 1. That's just amazing when you look at that.
Yeah.
On the West side. You look, Ole Miss is out. Mississippi State, we talked about them last weekend.
State's close to being out.
Yeah, 6-15, 24-20 overall. And that really crushes Hoover, goodness. If the crowd, I'm talking about the crowds. They're hating that because Ole Miss and Mississippi State bring the crowds to Hoover, and that's just going to be disappointing. I know that Hoover doesn't get to make their own bed there, but that's just one that I know that they and of course they love to have the Alabama schools. Some years they don't even get that. There's been some times where Alabama and Auburn both have not made it. At Texas A&M, Auburn's on the upswing, and there's a 3-way tie for second in the West. Alabama, Auburn, Texas A&M all at 9-12, and those 3, I still think that they got some work to do, all of them. I don't know what Alabama's RPI, and we can talk about that when we discuss them coming up. But I think the only 4, I think Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Missouri are out. And then the others, there's about 3 or 4 teams that got some work to do.
Yeah, A&M is going to close with Florida and College Station, Alabama in College Station, then an at Mississippi State.
Well, they're good.
So, yeah, I think that's 5 gettable games there maybe, although they've got to pitch at some point. That just has not happened for them. anywhere.
Yeah.
Bullpen, starting, whatever.
That is.
And Florida's a team that can challenge you. So.
Oh, sure. So they a lot of key games this weekend with 9 left. There's some interesting matchups and teams with a lot to play for that are trying to battle their way back, and so we'll see. But it's you can't believe this season, as all seasons do. It's sort of there's that start that kind of starts off like gangbusters, and next thing you know, you're halfway, and then to me, always the month of May just flies by. And once school's out, but there's not many weeks. There's 3 weeks left to go in this thing, and see how it shakes out.
Yeah, man, it's going to be interesting. Vandy, South Carolina, Florida, LSU, Arkansas, virtual locks for the NCAA tournament, barring a complete collapse. Kentucky is hard to know what to do with because the RPI is still 4.
They've lost 4 series in a row, 4 or 5. I mean, started off like gangbusters the first 20 games, and they've sort of just, as far as league play, hadn't gotten it done. And they've had some wins, but when you look at series wins, they haven't gotten it done over the last 4 weeks. So,
yeah, and it's going to be interesting. They go to. Let's see. They host South Carolina this weekend, which is reeling a little bit with injuries and some other stuff. And Carolina, you saw when Vanderbilt put the ball in play, it didn't go well for that defense a lot, and they've got some injuries on the infield. Kentucky's a team that's going to bunt and walk and all those things and steal bases. That could give Carolina some matchup problems. Then Kentucky goes to Tennessee. Kentucky, the only team that beat Tennessee last year. And again, same thing. Tennessee has been known to kick the ball around the infield. Kentucky's going to press your defense, and then Florida, that one in Lexington. So those are 3 fascinating series. Tennessee has got at Georgia, which again, fully field, tough place to play. Georgia wins a lot there. Kentucky, we talked about that, and out South Carolina. So you got a lot of teams that, like, I could see Tennessee getting hot and hosting, although that would require 2 series wins on the road, so maybe not. But, or if Tennessee just wet the bed, I mean, it would really have to wet the bed to get left out because it's 11-10 in the SEC at this point. I think Tennessee probably going to get the benefit of the doubt because I think people know that's a good team based on what it did a year ago. I don't know, man. It's going to be very interesting. You've got a lot of variables down the stretch here.
Yeah, and it just depends on who stays healthy. I mean,
right.
I was listening to the guys on the SEC network this morning, getting dressed and listening to those guys, and to a man, they were like, if Arkansas stays healthy, they're an Omaha team, but it's just they're not healthy right now, especially yeah. And so what are you going to? Vanderbilt's a totally different team. I think if Hunter Owen is healthy down the stretch, what they're a totally different. You look at what he did with 6 strikeouts in 4 innings and a 75, and he was on a pitch count for sure. So as a number 2 guy, Vanderbilt with him, they're a different team than they've been in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it depends on who's hot when you go down the stretch, when the tournament starts, and who, especially on the pitching side. And we've talked numerous times on this that, knock on wood here, that Vanderbilt has been a hamstringless injury team all along. You haven't had many guys getting banged up. You haven't had some injuries, the soft tissue stuff that's happened in the past, some hand injuries, hamate bones. Seems like one guy gets it every year. And it has been pretty much, with the exception of a few pitchers, they've had some guys that we talked about, Hunter Owen, and the whole situation with, a couple weeks ago when the rotation was jostled about a little bit, you had some guys you worried about, but pretty much, except for some guys who haven't pitched all that much, they've been able to kind of be on the upswing here, and you like to have that healthy going into your final 9 rather than the opposite. Arkansas's got that problem now, and several staffs do. Just take Ole Miss as a case in point there, that Ole Miss just has not recovered. They had one of their top 2 guys return I think it was a week ago, and he only threw 30 pitches, and he's back on the shelf. You can't do anything if your frontline guys are not throwing on the weekend. It's going to be hard in this league to get things going, and that's what you've seen. A lot of the teams that have faltered have not been able to rebound, and especially on the pitching side. So it's just who's healthy down the stretch and who can get healthy is really more important to some of these teams. Is more important than how they do in the last 9. If they can just go 500 but get guys healthy and so they're at full strength when the tournament starts, that's one thing.
Yeah, I want to reset the pitching discussion here, but to your point, pitching around the league has been so hard to get. Becker, who'd been pitching well for South Carolina, was poor this weekend. Mahoney, who'd pitched well, was poor. Will Sanders didn't pitch well. All those games against Auburn, that park, the ball gets out a little bit. But that's what you're playing in this league. LSU's pitching was not very good this weekend beyond Skeens. Ty Floyd was not very good after being really good at Ole Miss a week ago. Christian Little was pretty mediocre to poor. Probably I'd go more poor than mediocre on Sunday. Walked 5 guys in 3 1/3, I think. Their bullpen's down some arms. Tennessee look at, and that's an interesting team because Lindsey, who was their reliever who didn't pitch at all a year ago, has been their Friday guy and had been really good. They moved Burns to the bullpen where he's been better, and Beam's been pretty good, although he wasn't good a week ago. But Dolander, who was the top pitcher in the league coming in, I mean, it was either him or Skeens based on your opinion of Skeens and how you translated Mountain West numbers. I don't know really a good way to do that, but he's been the truth. But Dolander's the guy now for them that just can't get through starts.
Yeah, and there was a discussion on the SEC network this morning, like how good is LSU behind Skeens at the one spot? I think this is going to be a very interesting SEC tournament in Hoover because I think you're going to see, because of all the balance that's happened midweek throughout the league, I think this could be a wacky year where somebody off the wall wins it and you're just shaking your head because South Carolina, traditionally, I just laugh. I mean, they were bounced from the SEC tournament in some years when they went on that national title run annually. It was almost like they could care. It was the last thing they wanted to do is to be in the tournament. And if you're LSU, they've lost some games midweek to some teams in their own state. They're not going to pitch Skeens on a Wednesday, or Thursday, or maybe even a Friday just to make sure that he's fully ready for their opening round of their regional. So I think it's going to be a wide open tournament down there, and it could be some surprises because you see more and more of that where, 10, 12 years ago, you would see some teams gamble, especially some teams that had to get in, had to win a couple games where they would throw, a guy that they threw the previous Thursday night. Now they do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that final weekend, which is smart. But a lot of teams just stick through it, and they're just like, if we do well, fine. If we're not, we go home and we rest up and get ready for the regional. And I think you're going to see, based on kind of the makeup and the coaches that are involved in this thing, I think you're going to see those coaches at the top programs not take any chances with their rotation and stay with the ones that have been working for them most of the year on the weekend.
Well, Tim Corbin wants to win that event, but honestly, unless they wet the bed down the stretch and maybe don't get to 20. Well, although that's not, I mean, you could go 4-5 and wait, they're 16-5. So yeah, I mean, I think if they go 3-6 down the stretch, then they're 19-11 and maybe you want to get a couple there. But I think if you get to 20, I don't know how they don't not only host, but end up a national seed. I don't think they call it national seed anymore, do they? They just call it top 8. Don't they call all the teams that host national? Well, they used to. I think they may have changed the terminology, or maybe I'm just imagining that. But let's just call it top 8, just to be clear. I don't think that you've got much to play for down there, to be honest with you.
Probably
maybe you don't. No. Maybe you don't want to lose to Missouri or somebody like that. But I mean, I don't think. I think by that point, there's so many games. I don't know that. And I think all the SEC teams are top 50 in the RPI, other than maybe Ole Miss, which is close. So losing any of those games doesn't really ding you very much. I think if I was them, and I was thinking about this morning, Chip, I think if that's where they're comfortable, I just try to maybe throw Holton Friday, Owen Saturday, and Futrell Sunday, and maybe just keep that order. Maybe you move it up a day. But I just think I let those three guys pitch kind of in a role where they're comfortable and get them ready for next week. And if you lose two between now and then, and let's see, they're not going to play the Tuesday game, probably. So then you go Wednesday, Thursday. I mean, you could go with Grayson Carter down there and Riley down there. Both those guys are guys that don't give up a lot of home runs, and they do walk some guys. But, I mean, that might be a good testing ground. And look, we're 3 weeks away. We'll probably have this discussion again later. But to me, that might be a good testing ground to see what those guys can do in extended starts if you can get them there, so that you can feel comfortable or not comfortable with those guys if you need to use them in key roles in the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, they've got definitely the experience and the number of appearances of that staff. We've talked about how we've said this the last 2 weekends, not much on the roster as far as position players and depth and at bats that they've had in years past. I mean, when you see that, Troy Leneve has had 8 at bats the entire season, that's unusual because, I mean, he's had way more than that in the previous 2 seasons. The guy who actually ended up winning a starting role towards the end of the year when some injuries happened, but just not a lot of depth on the position player size. But they've got some guys, and especially if you can get Dukanich back, which we keep thinking and hearing that he's doing bullpens and he's getting there, but it seems like every Sunday at a press conference when asked, it's just he's still got a ways to go, or they're holding him back. But you would like to think, God, man, if you could get him some innings in Hoover, and you get some other guys who, Cunningham back on track. We don't know what his situation is, but just get some of those guys through the Wednesday, Thursday game, and then you just let it ride and see how you can do if you make it to Friday, which I agree with what you're saying. I think you stick with that rotation. I don't think with the situation with Holton went through a couple weeks ago with some tightness, and with Hunter Owen, I don't think you're going to see him mess any. There's not going to be any messing with that rotation. I don't think he's going to move it up a day at all. But you're mentioning it sparked my interest. I think Patrick Riley's the story of the weekend.
Yeah,
he is my player of the weekend, because that game had a chance to get away real quick if he does not come in and shut the door, and that was discussed in the post game. He changed the momentum of the game. Here's a guy who has not pitched anywhere near the innings that you would thought, with 25 2/3. But coming into that game, he was probably 20. I mean, 20 innings before, and has kind of been a forgotten guy. And going out there, I mean, he's gotten some appearances, but where you thought someone with his experience would be a lot further along in innings pitched. And I think he just, I was proud of him. I think it's really difficult when you lose your spot, and you lose your spot in the rotation, or when you're called upon. And he got the nod. I was kind of surprised. I was at that game and to see him trot out there, but they lose that game much like the Tennessee game in Knoxville. You lose, losing the momentum that could have caused losing that game after reeling and losing 3 games in Knoxville, and he shut the door and allowed that team to win. So he's my star, and it was great. I think he's, that was a big confidence booster for him. And I know that, looking for accolades of the weekend of all the pitchers who pitched, there were some good performances. I liked Hunter Owen's performance coming back after being off, but I think you got to give the star of the weekend for the pitching for Patrick Riley.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's reset the pitching here for a minute. All right, how do we feel about Holton in the 1? I have mixed feelings. I think Carter's a guy who responds very well to competitive situations, and he's not a guy who I think is going to get spooked by the moment. He also does get sped up at times. There's that. The thing that concerns me is he has walked or hit 33 guys in 48 2/3 innings. You saw the control pop up again as an issue this weekend. which is weird because he's a guy that this season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing. It's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast because without it, this season would not be possible. His reputation coming in and the reason he got the ball to start the season last year in a weekend series as a true freshman was because he threw strikes. And so now we know about the issue with with discomfort or whatever you want to put it, with soreness, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And maybe that's been some of it, but I think I feel good about Holton in the one, but I would like to see more strike throwing than I've seen recently.
Well, he leads the team in hit batsmen. He, as you said, he's got 11. He leads the team in wild pitches with 5. He's 7. Let's see. The difference between him and the next pitcher with hit batsman is he's got 11 and several have 4. Now, I will say this about Carter Holton. He's not afraid to pitch inside, and Kentucky's guys are standing literally on top of the plate.
Oh my goodness. I've never seen a team with a lineup that stands so close to it.
So, how many did he hit Friday night? 3 or 4? It was a lot. And we'll hit one guy on the head.
Walk some guys and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that when you look at it is if you tinkered with that a little bit, would you put Owen at the 1 and Holton at the 2? And Owen, I didn't realize this, and I did some investigating on this. Hunter Owen is the top collegiate left-handed pitcher in the draft, according to many outlets out there.
I've heard that too. Mm-hmm.
Which is, I never would have thought that unless that was brought up in my attention. I know he's a talented arm, but I did not know that he was. Now, there's some high school 18-year-olds who are left-handed who are a bit more heralded than him as far as being drafted. But so here's a guy. I mean, he's going to get his name called. Because he's a junior, right? Draft. I mean, you get confusing with the COVID years and all that. So, I mean, he's a guy who's going to get his name called. But so you wonder if there's any tinkering. But knowing number 4, I in Corbin, I don't know if he does that. If he does it, he could be easily. Well, with this week being Thursday, you got these strange Thursday, Friday, Saturday games, which I don't mind them. It allows. Heck, I would have liked it when I played to get that Sunday off and you get the national exposure on Thursday night with the game being on ESPNU. But you can't really do it this weekend, can you? I mean, it's a short week.
No. And here's why I would not. You know how Corbin has always held fast to we are not going to change our rotation thing. In other words, you see some teams that won't pitch their ace in a regional on a Friday night game against Florida A&M or whoever, and then they will, throw their ace in the most important game, which is that Saturday night winners bracket game. For most of the teams, occasionally you will see a powerhouse lose a Friday game. Usually that's to a team that's got an ace and maybe not much else, but. That's the thing, there's always been that discussion of, are they going to move a guy and change up their pitching? Tim wouldn't do it if he's facing me and you. So this might be a case where, I mean, Holton is good enough to win that game, especially. I mean, look at I feel like we are, or maybe I am underselling Carter at the moment. I don't mean to do that. I'm a big believer in his, but the control's been an issue, right? And so it's something we talk about. But I think Holton in that kind of game, particularly if you've got Owen to use against, I don't know who you play, a Clemson, an NC State, or somebody like that, a North Carolina, Indiana State, whoever your 2 seed is, you're probably playing in that Saturday night game. I think it sets up really well when you look at it that way.
Yeah, and I think he just seemed like he was pitching uphill the entire night. Everything was contentious on Friday night. He'd get in a jam, and he had 2 runners on. He'd strike out 2 guys, and he'd come off the field, and he was pumping his fist, and he was excited, and it was good to see that. But it was everything. There was not a smooth inning at all that he had against. And then you look up, and he's got 79 pitches. That's what, and those things can take a toll on you emotionally. Takes a lot of energy to, when you look up and you've thrown that many pitches. Kentucky fouling pitches off. He was going deep into counts. There was some pickup runners. You're pitching from the stretch. So it's been, when you couple that with Holton, with the fact that, last weekend was, even though in a losing effort, was a little bit more smooth than it was against Kentucky, but still he had the arm tightness. So you kind of wrap that all up in a bow, and it just hasn't been the Carter Holton for the last 3-4 weeks that you've seen at this point last season. And he's just got to get recentered into where his control and his command. But I will say that doesn't bother. You saw the reaction from Scott Brown, and I love that if you were there at the game. I know you were there at the game, but you probably noticed that Scott Brown was upset about, I think he thought some Kentucky players were turning into pitches, and he let the umpire hear about it, and he walked out to the pitching visit, and he was going to make that umpire come out. If people don't understand how that works, if you have a gripe, you can bark as you're going out and crossing the lines to talk to your pitcher and get your point across. And then you just stand out there until the home plate umpire, and everybody knows what's going on. And then he just absolutely chewed his rear end out and got his point across. But so it might be a situation where those guys aren't going to, they're not going to feel too bad about the hit batsman if they're called inside pitches and they're standing on top of the plate. That doesn't bother me if he's just plunking guys with controls issue. If the ball's there on the inner half and they're there and they get hit, that's one thing. I hope that makes sense, but it might not bother them as much as, there's also of being effectively wild where you don't want to have anybody digging in. And then there's just being wild where you can't find the zone. You can't throw into the ocean either.
Yeah. That's a team that if you're playing in Hoover, you may not want to play, because I think that Park plays to Kentucky and that tournament plays to Kentucky's strengths. They got, 13 or 14 guys that have thrown 10-plus innings this year, which you don't see that a lot. They use a lot of arms this weekend. They're going to run a lot. You got a lot of foul territory down there. So, if there's a wild pitch or whatever, they're poised to take advantage of a lot of that. And they just will chew through pitch counts. I mean, Vanderbilt threw 190-something pitches on Friday night. Now, what saved Vanderbilt in that series, Chip, was Kentucky didn't really have a lot of guys who can hit the long ball, and I suspect that's why you probably won't see that team in Omaha, because you just need a bopper somewhere, and they just don't really have one, which, you could argue that might end up being Vanderbilt's undoing too, is it's not a team with a lot of home run dudes, but if you get to Omaha, then, again, that whole thing resets because of the ballpark.
Right, and another thing Kentucky will do, they'll make you pick it up and throw it to bases too.
Yes,
on bunts.
And some teams are going to have trouble with that.
And you know what surprised me in listening to the game on the way back into town yesterday is they did that a lot in the weekend, and then there were instances where they didn't. I was thinking there were going to be instances where they would squeeze. Two separate instances, where I thought the either safety squeeze and put Vanderbilt in motion, make them make a play at the plate, or suicide squeeze, and they didn't do either one. I think, and that was mentioned, I think, post game that by Corbin. I think he even mentioned that there were some times, one or two instances, they thought that a situation that they would get a squeeze and they didn't. And that was just something I picked up. As much as they move the ball around and go station to station and put the ball in play and make people pick it up and field it and throw it, they didn't. There were a couple instances that make me scratch my head this weekend and wonder why they didn't do that. But yeah, I agree with you. I could see Kentucky being a dangerous team in Hoover for every reason why that you said. Threw a lot of arms, big park, bunt, station to station, got some guys with experience, older team, transfers, so they could do some damage down there. I agree with that.
Yeah, I've got a theory on that, and his name is Davis Diaz. Because I think he is an elite third baseman in terms of fielding. I know the hitting has fallen off lately, and I get that, and I have some questions about hitting Davis Diaz in the 2-hole right now. But in any case, as a third baseman, he has been phenomenal. And I've looked at this for, I don't know, probably 15 years. I look around a lot the league at third baseman, and it feels like there's a lot of guys that are fielding sub 900 at that spot year to year. Like Kentucky is a really good defensive team. Their guy was fielding 890, I think, coming into the weekend at third. I feel like if you're 920 or up, you're pretty good for college baseball. And I feel like if you're 940 or up or elite, he's 951. Now, some of that's come at shortstop, and the number I'm quoting there is fielding percentage. But I think that probably had something to do with it, is that they can do that against teams, and maybe every team in the league, it's going to be easier to do that than it is against Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and what we talked about, I know there's some people out there that are seeing his struggles, but you got to balance it out for what he's doing at third, just as you mentioned. I mean, he doesn't lead the team in errors. He and Parker Nolan both have 6. R.J. Austin has one more at 7. And yes, he's floundering at that spot, and you wonder if it's at a point where they will consider shuffling the deck on there and moving him down a little bit to give some potential, to give him some better pitches. And the argument is that he's protecting, in a sense, he's protecting Enrique at that one spot somewhat, that he's, with Enrique getting on so much, but he hadn't been able to move those guys over. But I like Davis Diaz as a player, and the question for those who, if people are barking to take him out of the lineup, J.D. Rogers, Hewitt, Espinal, McKenzie, Leneve, Arias, who's going in for him? I don't see any of those.
Well, you're not taking him out of the lineup because of the glove. I don't think that's exactly. Even a right. I don't even think that's a discussion, and it shouldn't be, because the fielding has been so good. He does. If you're looking for a bright spot, he's struck out 31 times to 27 walks, so he's gonna make you work a little bit. He's been hit 8 times, so there's that. I don't think he's as bad a hitter as he's been recently, but this is 2 years in a row where the slash line's been pretty underwhelming at season's end.
Well, he's a talented kid. He's someone that I was made aware of by a coach that coached him for the USA team, and he told me long before he came to Vanderbilt about his hands and his athleticism and his competitiveness, and I think he'll bust out of it. I don't think it would be too bad of an idea to move him down a little bit at this point. But that lineup card's been pretty consistent, Chris. We've talked about that, I don't know if there's been a change in the last 9 or 10, 11 conference games. It's been that you could just print it out and you know what it's going to be. The one exception yesterday being Espinal, which was great to see him get the success hitting the walk-off, giving Bolger the day off. And those are going to come in handy too down the line when you're catching 3 games on a weekend. I know Espinal's been getting into the middle of the week, the games there, but that was a big opportunity for him. He deserved the opportunity. I think he's been doing well when he gets it. And for him to hit the ball one off the fence and get the walk-off, I was happy with that. So that's, with the exception of yesterday, I would have to look back and do some research, but that's the first tweak in the lineup that we've seen on 3-game SEC series in a long time. Now, whether they will have to give Diaz a little room there in the lineup and move him down, and for perhaps he can see some more plus pitches in his repertoire as far as getting not so where he's not feeling the pressure of hitting the 2-hole, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I want to get back to pitching in a minute. First of all, the Espinal moment was very cool, and I was on the field, and you can see our video on our YouTube channel where there were a couple of teammates. I didn't even see who because it was blocked by Allen, but they were giving us the shh, don't let him know this is coming. So we're trying to talk to him and try not to give a tell that he's about to get Gatorade or water or whatever was in there dumped over his head. So that was kind of funny. That's the first one I've covered of those, is a guy I'm interviewing getting a Gatorade or an ice bath or whatever it was. You can check.
Well, you're lucky. You're lucky you didn't get soaked. You're lucky you didn't get soaked.
Well, I backed up just enough to try to not tip Espinal off, but also not get it myself. I got a little bit on my feet, but it was fine.
Well, I did watch that last night when I got back and I saw you, and I didn't know. I was like, at first, then you came clean and you said we were sworn to we'd keep the secret. But
that was a little strong. It was just the guys that were coming behind him were giving the shush sign. So you're not going to.
Gotcha.
You're not going to spoil a surprise for everyone in that spot. So
gotcha. Well, that shows how much the guys liked and respected, and it's good to when he gets his chance and he gets a walk off. I know he was that was a great moment for him.
Okay, before we go back to pitching, how would you construct the batting order right now? Let's go through this. Bradfield in the leadoff spot. I think that's pretty easy. If you want to go left, right, left, you know what? I'd be tempted to hit Maldonado in that second hole. I really would be.
That's a thought. I mean, there is a method to the madness that people don't realize of doing the right, left situation. And some people might not understand that, but I could see, if Maldonado makes contact, definitely. I mean, the 2-hole, I don't know if you'd necessarily swap Diaz and Maldonado, though. Maybe you move everybody up one and give Diaz maybe the 8 or 9 spot. I'm not, if that's what you're maybe leaning to, but I could see Maldonado going to the 2-hole. Good contact guy, drives the ball. That wouldn't bother me one bit.
Yeah, let's see. Sorry, as I shuffle through some papers here. Oh, goodness. This is making for great podcasting.
But, of course, when you have in the Espinal, you have Bulger in the 4-hole, so that's been the consistent with being in the cleanup. And, there was a couple weeks ago we were talking about some people were debating that. As far as, and you look at the stats, I mean, Bulger and Diaz, Bulger 250, Diaz 242, bring up the rear of the team stats as among the regulars. So that's another topic that you can talk about too. But I think moving Maldonado would be possibly up in the order, not necessarily swapping Diaz with him, but bumping everybody up and maybe moving, I don't know, Diaz right in front or below Vastine could be a possibility. But, who are we to say?
Okay, let's try this on for size. Let's go Bradfield, Maldonado, Shrek. I think that's easily your top 3 hitters right now, looking at stat lines. Then you can go, oh man. If you're looking for a right-hander in cleanup, you could go Austin. You could even go Vastine. I mean, he's got some pop there. I think I'd go Austin. You could go Nolan 5, then you're keeping the left-right thing up. Then you could put Bulger or Diaz 6. Go back to a lefty. Let's see, who have you got at that point? You go Vastine. I don't know. I think Polk maybe. Do we have Polk in here at this point?
Yeah,
I don't know. I think just what I would do. I think I'd move Maldonado up. I think that's really what I'm getting at. Really, once you get past 4 or 5, okay, whatever. I'm looking down at the on bases. Polk 387, Vastine 363, Austin 364, Nolan 357, Bulger 356, Diaz 365. That's remarkable. You've got 5 guys. They're all within 10 points of on-base percentage of each other, all between 356 and 365 in your starting lineup. Right. Diaz is your last guy in terms of slugging. Vastine's your top. So I guess there is an argument to be made for moving Vastine up potentially. But, yeah, it gets clustered quickly after that.
Well, you and I both know in following Vanderbilt baseball under Tim Corbin, I think if he makes a move, it's not going to be a big switching the entire lineup. It might be just flopping 2 guys and moving. It's not going to be musical chairs of he just doesn't do that. It's just consistency is what he believes in. So I don't think either way we sit here and talk about it, but I don't think there's going to be a situation where he just changes all of a sudden what has been working for them. Now you can't sit there and say that you're not going to do anything if the stats continue to do the way they are and guys don't, or maybe not making contact at the top of the order. But if you look at the track record, I don't think that's going to happen here, where he's going to move and make a bunch of moves here or the order. It's the way it's always been.
Yeah. Yeah, Austin and Diaz are the only 2 guys in SEC play slugging under 400. Austin 381, Diaz 372. Austin, their lowest on-base guy in SEC play, 326, followed by Diaz at 337 and Bulger at 340.
Yeah, and those numbers are telling. I mean, you can hit all you want to in the preseason and midweek, and then once it gets to the SEC, I think that's where the separation comes into play, and that's with every team though. That's just not Vanderbilt. That's what you're going to see everywhere.
I'm going to go back to look up SEC ranks because they have been leading the league in run scoring in league play pretty much all year. I bet you LSU's overtaken them now. We're about to find out. While I'm doing that, back to the rotation for a minute. I think, man, if you just get a good start out of Carter Holton, like you think you can get, you've got to feel phenomenal about their pitching because Grayson Moore came back this weekend and looked good. Leboke is usable in spots and not usable in others. Maldonado's Maldonado. We mentioned Patrick Riley. I think Grayson Carter can be used in spots.
Thomas Schultz got the win.
Schultz looked better. I mean, to me, if you get a Carter Holton-like start out of Carter Holton, you feel tremendous about your pitching because I don't know that 2 and 3, there may not be a team in the country other than maybe Wake Forest that's happier with what they're getting there.
Yeah, I think the depth, this team is made for a regional where there's that 1 or 2 extra games that you don't have in a super regional. I think in years past, and of course we can say if everybody's healthy with that asterisk by it, but with the number of innings they've got and the number of arms they can throw at you and different, lefty, righty, I think this team, if it gets in trouble in a regional and has to play an extra game on a Sunday or winner take all or a Monday night, I think they're primed to do that. Especially if you get Dukanich back. If he can get him some innings before, he's got 6 on the year, so there's not really a whole sample there. But we know what the arm action that he has, and that just makes them that much more potent. But it was great to see Thomas Schultz get the win and get back out there. He's kind of sort of been not the forgotten guy, but I would lump Schultz and Riley together as far as this season. Two guys who you were counting on. You mentioned that kind of every other year with Schultz, but two guys who were counted on to give a lot more innings than they've thrown this year, although 25 and 2/3 for Riley, 19 for Schultz. But just the appearances, especially here of late here, where those two guys before this weekend were sort of this last 3 weeks were, I hate to say forgotten, but they weren't be the ones that were getting called on. That if you were in a time machine a year ago and you said who's going to be in this certain situation, those two guys would definitely be called on. So I think the arms, and it was interesting. Chris, I picked up on this yesterday. Who they went with yesterday in Game 3. Yeah, I think the question was asked on the pitching side, and I think it told a definite. I think a statement was being made that by Tim Corbin, they could have gone back to Maldonado. They didn't for Game 3. They went with, a couple guys who you wouldn't have thought of, Hleboki, Moore, Jack Anderson, to finish that game after Futrell, where there was a situation you thought, well, Maldonado's going to get the ball. He only threw a certain number of innings, pitches. I think, how many did he throw on Friday night?
11.
Was it like 11? Yeah. So he could have gone, but he didn't. And that's a statement to, you're giving the ball to Hleboki, Moore, and Anderson and trusting those guys in a game you're trying to sweep, in a game that helps you in the RPI and everything, and they do the job. And I think coming out of it, I think it's going to make those guys just as strong. Hleboki, the only thing that with the guys coming off Tommy John, I don't know what Hleboki, because he seemed like he's been there forever. I know his velocity has been more mid-90s in the past, and
no, it's always been high 80s,
upper 80s,
90s.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's just and that's a good change of pace. But I thought he hit some 90s yesterday. I know from what I was listening to the broadcast, but he's not going to hit you with 94, 95 like a Riley does. But he does his best performance when he can keep the ball down and he's not getting the ball out of the park, because he does have that tendency, and that's going to have to be something that they watch. But you look at his line yesterday, I mean, just threw an inning, and faced 5 batters, but he kept them in the game in that 7th, 8th, and 9th, those 3 guys, and they deserve credit and kudos for just as much as anything for getting that win yesterday.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we've talked about a lot of pitchers, and we haven't even mentioned Ryan Ginther. Look, they've got 3 durable good starters: Futrell, Owen, Holton. They've got an ace closer in Maldonado. They got a long man in Riley, who is looking more and more like a usable part. He's got a 2.61 ERA and 10 1/3 SEC innings. You got Ginther. You got Hleboki, who, again, can be used in spots, and I think is a guy like in Hoover that probably comes in more valuable than maybe in some other venues. You got Schultz, who hasn't been great, but we've seen it work for him. You got Bryce Cunningham, whatever's up there. When Cunningham is feeling comfortable, it works pretty well. By the way, Cunningham's given up 21 of their 93 SEC earned runs. And only used 16 2/3 of their 183. So you take his line out, and the league ERA gets a lot better. Anyway, and just to jump around a little bit more to close the loop, LSU now has scored 1 more run than Vanderbilt in SEC play, 175 to 174. 3rd place in the league in runs scored to South Carolina at 158. Now, some of that with Vandy is a product of his schedule. Vanderbilt's not played LSU, Florida, some other teams yet that are pretty good, Arkansas. And so that maybe comes down to earth a little bit, but it's the SEC and nothing's ever easy. And by the way, in runs allowed, I hate that they go by ERA, because the unearned runs count too. Although Vanderbilt now does lead the SEC in the ERA in league games at 4.57, which is just. That's hideous when 4.57 leads the league in ERA. Don't get me started on my bat rant. Although you could be Mississippi State at a sparkling 9.82. But they've given up 103 runs in all games in the league, which is first ahead of Kentucky's 105.
Yeah, and you look at and just that ERA situation, is just the number of runs that are given up on Sundays, especially if you look at the LSU run, the scores of LSU games on game threes of conferences.
Yeah.
I mean, several have been double digits. I mean, Kentucky was a double digit. It seems like every time LSU plays on it's not just a Sunday, I'll just call it day three, game three. And that's that part that they were talking about in the SEC network this morning, like who past Skeens is going to get the job done, because it seems like they've lost some games midweek and then they're just kind of mashing people in games 2 and 3 and winning with their bats, almost like a little bit like South Carolina as well.
I almost forgot we've got a mailbag to do.
Let's hit it.
All right. The mailbag is presented by our good friends at Sutherland and Belk, which is a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Okay, we kind of went through this earlier. Mamalo says, would you take 2-1 at Bama, 1-2 at Florida, 2-1 against Arkansas? Do you think 21-9 wins the East and gets us a national seed? That is about where I settled. I think that's exactly where I settled. And my answer to that would be yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we talked about that. Yeah, I think that definitely gets you a national seed and top 8 seed, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I think that's that 5.8 by you was really a good number. I don't know which way, but it's either 6 or 5, and that's why they have casinos. That's why casinos have free food, and they try to get you to come in there and give you free drinks because they want you to bet, and they want half the people to bet on one side and half the people to bet on the other side, and they get the juice. But yeah, that's I think anything in that range, 5 or 6, I think you're in a good spot.
Okay, Pepperdor asked a question about Diaz that we basically answered earlier. Okay, here's one from Door Fan. This is a long one. I'm going to see if I can cut to the chase, and I'm not sure he's actually asking a question as much as he's responding to one. So I'm going to skip that, but I will still say I think LSU is going to end up winning the league, but we'll see. Okay, Ann Arbor Door says, can you explain the rule change with the balls this year on the broadcast? There was some reference to a situation where the ball needs to be replaced due to something the pitcher does or doesn't do. Just wondering how that works.
If you go to your mouth, if you lick your fingers and you go to your mouth and you don't wipe it off, then the umpire, if he sees it, can request that the ball be thrown out. And I have seen where the batter can request it, because there was a game a couple weeks ago where the batter asked for the ball to be thrown out. So again, lick your fingers. You have to wipe it off on your shirt or your pants. If you don't, again, if they see it, they can request for the ball to be thrown out. Simple, pretty simple. But and there's different things over the years that have been on cold weather. I don't know if they still do this, but if there's a gentleman's agreement that they can go to their mouth. But I think the new part of it is the not wiping it off, and instead getting that pine tar that's on underneath your helmet, your hat, and wiping that on.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, well, not that would have happened last year anywhere,
right.
But yeah, I think there's been, and I don't know what it is because the SEC never publicized it. But I was told before the season that they were watching out more for substances, and perhaps you've seen a player or two who's not as effective as they were a year ago. If that's the case, you can't go to your hat or other things. So, yeah,
well, and I don't think that was one of those things they didn't they sure publicized the pitch clock and all that, but they didn't. As far as the going to your mouth after and trying to get, and people understand that your hands do get dry and there might be some dirt on it or whatever, and there is that gripping situation, and there's been some talk of as far as flattening the seams over the years. Seams back when I pitched, and for a while there, they had really tall seams, which enabled pitchers to get advantage of bigger breaking balls and more effective movement on their pitches, and then they sort of flattened those seams over the years. And it is definitely hard. You kind of feel like you're throwing a bowling ball out there if if that makes sense. You got to get a grip on it and to make some effective pitches. So that's why pitchers want to do that, to get that grip and be able to, get their fingers in a position to throw breaking balls, really.
I don't know what they need to do with the balls, but I mean, maybe replace the cork center with a marshmallow or something at this point. It's just ridiculous.
Well, you can tell when one's squared up, the sound, and of course the bats provide a lot of that with the high exit velocities. But it just seems like the ball sometimes is a little bit more lively, and the sound that comes off of it when it's hit on the screws is that combination of these bats and the ball. It just seems like it's the sound action is a lot different from what I've noticed.
Yeah. All right, we're done with the mailbag. Any parting thoughts?
Parting thoughts, just, got a game that you can't lose against Georgia State. You got to win that game, take care of business, get some guys some action that you didn't get this weekend. And I'm sure it'll probably be a staff day with it being a Tuesday night and a quick turnaround Thursday. And you got to remember, I'm not sure the exam schedule, what they're in, but it was a weekend that they were taking exams, and I think today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. And then they are out, and baseball season continues and school season's over. And you look for that push in May of this team that always happens. Didn't happen as much last year, but when the free time and you don't have the constraints of the practice time, so many hours a week and all that. So we'll see how they jump into that. But big 9 ball games, want to be consistent, stay in there, stay in the standings, keep your RPI up, stay healthy above all, and make sure that your guys are taking care of themselves, and where you're going with a full staff heading to the regional, and that's what this team's looking to do.
Chip, you run a thriving real estate business. Some folks in the audience may be looking to buy or sell homes. I know we've had at least one or two that have heard about you on the podcast and have done so. So tell folks what they need to know about their real estate needs this time of year.
Sure. We've taken care of 2 customers of ours that listen to the podcast, and we hooked them up with some quality realtors in specific areas that were important to them. One was out in the Cool Springs area in Williamson County. The other was in the Germantown area, buying condos in both instances, and we're happy to. I met with those people, talked with them. We analyzed their needs as far as what they wanted in a home, and moving to Nashville, in one case moving back to Nashville from out of state, one coming from the state of Georgia, and really enjoyed meeting those people. Anytime that you're involved in a market like the one in Nashville, and pretty much nationally, but the Nashville market has been a surging market, even with the high interest rates of late. It's still very competitive, and you need to have an advocate on your side in this process, whether you're buying a house, whether you're listing a house, moving across town, or moving out of state. You can call one of our agents, and I can hook you up with one of our 180 agents, and 2 offices, one in Brentwood in the Maryland Farms area, and one here in Green Hills, just about a block or 2 south of the mall. And we can show that our quality, being in business for over 60 years. We've got full-time agents that do this for a living, and they're not selling their cousin and their aunt and their uncle a house and selling once a year. We have professionals that do this. They're inside the market. They know it. They understand it. They live it. They breathe it. And they can be an advocate for you in this very particular market of Nashville that's different than pretty much a lot of markets across the country. So you can check our website out at frederickandclark.com. You can call me personally at 615-327-4800, and love to help any of the listeners out for their real estate needs, buying or selling. And that's, again, Frederick and Clark Realty. We've been around since 1957, helping Vanderbilt fans and SEC fans and just normal Jills and Joes across Nashville, Middle Tennessee, in this area. We've got a broad appetite surrounding the entire mid-state area, and love to help them out.
Chip, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next week.
All right, Chris, have a good week.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, vandysports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at vandysports.com. Follow me at chrislee70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.